Welcome back. So in the previous video, we talked about all the steps involved in traditional batik. And in this video, we're going to talk about how it might fit in your art classroom. So the first thing I'd like you to do is make sure that you have the copy of these two resources, Connecting to Concepts, Incorporating Batik, and this one, Scaffolding Instruction, Exploring Batik. And we're going to kind of talk through the thought process of why and how you might integrate some of this into your classroom. So get a pen ready because we're going to dive in. So anytime you hear about a new technique or a new project that you could be doing in your classroom, you kind of have to weigh out the value of the new process in conjunction with your curriculum. Like, is the juice really worth the squeeze? We know as art teachers that anytime you're trying something new, there's money involved in supplies and there's time involved getting everything ready, making student samples. So is it gonna be worth it? On this resource, there's a grid here to kind of help you be more metacognitive and think through these decisions as you're weighing whether or not you want to incorporate batik into your classroom. So let's take a closer look and I'll kind of fill it out with you. Go ahead and get the pause button ready so that if you need some time to kind of pause and write and think, you'll be able to do that. So the first column here asks you to identify some of the main concepts being introduced in this pro pack. And I went ahead and put a couple in for you. When I think about batik and my classroom, the three things that really stand out to me as core learning are wax resist, color theory, and also the connection to Southeast Asia. I mentioned in a previous video that batik kind of developed simultaneously in several parts of the world, but just what I personally do is tend to focus on batik from that area with my kids. So then the next kind of column on this resource asks you to reflect and think about whether or not you're currently addressing some of these concepts. Are they already in your curriculum? So is this something that could support what you're already doing? And then it asks you to describe how, and think about what age groups or classes, what courses they're taught in, and kind of the normal course sequence. So if I'm thinking, for example, about wax resist, I do teach wax resist already, and I teach it to my first graders, and it tends to happen in the first quarter of the year. And in terms of an instructional sequence, I like to teach wax resist to them right after they've had an introduction to watercolor. So they kind of already know about, using their brush and making marks and incorporating water and getting the paint onto the paper. And then I like to enrich that experience by adding wax resist on top. So this happens after an intro to watercolor. And if I move down the line here to compare, it's asking if I've taught these concepts in the past, what was successful about the learning experience, what could be improved, and how could I use information from this pro pack to kind of bolster what I'm already doing? Well, since I'm already teaching wax resist, I'm thinking to myself that the experience of learning about how other artists use wax resist, specifically for batik, or an application of wax resist that happens in other parts of the world might really enrich that experience. So I'm thinking that maybe this could be something that I could add to my curriculum to kind of give an example. So instead of just having my first graders paint, with watercolor over their crayon, this might be a way to incorporate information about other cultures. This might be another way for students to see how a method or a technique actually is used by practicing artists. So I do think that this is something that I could incorporate in my curriculum and use. So that's just one example. And of course, everybody's answers are going to be a little bit different. There's also a blank here at the bottom because maybe you have a different takeaway as you're watching all of these videos. Maybe there's something about batik that you think is a piece of core learning that would be more applicable to your students. So as we're going through here, go ahead and pause the video and respond to these and think about where it might fit within the continuum of what you're already teaching. And then when you're done writing, come back to me. Okay, hopefully you're back and you filled all of this out. I want to draw your attention to this next resource, Scaffolding Instruction. So I mentioned before, I hope you did not get scared when I was talking about melting hot wax and think, I am not gonna tackle this in my room. That sounds too scary. There are a lot of ways to modify batik for all age and skill levels. And in this Pro Pack, we're gonna talk about 3. We are gonna be exploring wax resist with crayon for emerging artists. We are gonna talk about flower paste batik for more developed artists. And we're gonna talk about hot wax batik for master artists. So throughout this Pro Pack, this is gonna be sort of the touchstone that you can come back to time after time to take notes, kind of compare maybe the processes that are involved, the types of materials that might be used, some of the general skills or knowledge that are covered in each of these 3 batik techniques, and also sort of the artistic development or age appropriateness of each one. I got you started making notes in a couple of the cells. So like I said, this is gonna be kind of a touchstone that you are gonna use throughout this entire Pro Pack to kind of take notes and help you choose which of these projects you're gonna want to start with your particular students. So really, another way to think about this is it's gonna help you identify student readiness. And when we're talking about student readiness, you might be thinking about the fine motor skills or the ability to manage complex tools while drawing or painting. Also engagement, age-appropriate ability to engage and sustain with a multi-step process. And as you're looking at emerging, developed, and master, I think it's really easy to fall into the trap of thinking, oh, she means an elementary, middle school, and high school project. I actually don't, because depending on the level of student you have and their readiness, it could be that you have high school kids that are really more ready to look at wax resist with crayons just because of some of the safety issues involved. But you also might have elementary kids who are ready for a more developed project like the flower paste batik because they have excellent fine motor skills and maybe they're good at multi-step directions. And then you'll notice I did kind of make a note here about hot wax in the Master Artist project because that is our hot wax batik project. We are gonna get to it in some videos coming up here. I just really think personally for me that hot wax makes it appropriate only for high school. It's not something I would do probably with elementary ever, just because of some of the safety concerns involved. So again, as we go through this, you can be thinking about student readiness and how it might fit in with each of these projects. I mentioned engagement. Something like flower paste batik takes a lot more time than wax resist with crayon. So again, you might need, even if you have good fine motor skills, you might need a kid that's a little older and who's ready to engage with something over the course of, several weeks. So all that being said, we are gonna dive into this first category here for emerging artists, wax resist with crayon. And in the next video, we'll talk specifically about how to make that wax resist.